Okay. All right, the jury's out. The verdict is I've been slacking on this channel for quite a while, 3 years to be exact, and time's up. It's time to dust the cobwebs off, and bring on a new guest. And I think you guys are going to like this next one because honestly, he is single-handedly one of the most, at least in my opinion, one of the most charismatic and interesting investing, crypto, AI, tech-related podcasters, YouTube channels. Definitely one of the most informative or insightful content creators I've come across recently. So I just had to contact him. And I don't know what I'm doing right, but these guys keep agreeing to speak with me. So you're going to have to give your boy some grace. I definitely went on a tangent throughout this entire conversation, but I kept it authentic. I also did not capture the podcast in the most quality focused way. But again, the main theme here is authenticity. And I actually didn't even cut most of what we talked about out. So you're going to catch a lot of quirks on this first trial after 3 years. I've been out of practice, but you're definitely going to learn a lot. So grab a notepad and a pen and enjoy. Keith, man, I've been able to I'm pretty happy that I came across your channel like a few weeks ago, as I mentioned earlier, but this is obviously not our first conversation, but there's a lot that has happened since we last spoke, right? What I'm hoping we can at least touch on is just a quick introduction as to pretty much who you are, if there's one quote that you would actually start your day with to get I'd say your 16-year-old self going, what would that be?
Oh, man. Yeah, that's a big one to start with. Anyone who watches a large amount of my content will know that I try to claim every day is the best day of my life. So that's one thing. But if I had to go back and talk to the 16-year-old, I think it would be something around just like patience, just being patient and recognizing that things happen on the time that they happen on, and all you can do is put your head down and grind. And that's probably the second thing. You actually need to go a lot harder than you think you do.
Yeah. Patience and grinding. So keeping your head down. I'm for it.
Yeah.
Probably say the same thing about myself. I only actually brought up the age of 16 because most of what I've actually gathered on regarding your story, which I don't want to start from scratch necessarily during this call, is you've been a very high agency individual from the very beginning. I'm sure there's certain elements throughout your life you'd be able to actually attribute that kind of fervor to. There's a kind of level of, how do I say this? There's a go-getter nature that you have with respect to how you go about life, but you do it gracefully. So I guess your current state of launching this channel on YouTube, which clearly I've been taken by, and a few other people as well have. What Cole's notes or quick, actually, maybe we can unpack it today. Like, what is the actual reason behind it? What has fueled that future-focused individual that you've clearly demonstrated here?
I appreciate the question and the framing and the research that you've done. I would say the major thing, man, and I did bring this up on another podcast with Ben, it was like just seeing my parents and how hard they were working. For me, it was just immediately, okay, we're living a normal life. No one's hurting here, but like the level of effort that it's taking to not have any control over your circumstances, to me was like, that doesn't work. And I think my generation in general, like I think a lot of us have just grown up in this world where being an entrepreneur is the cool thing to do, or like the standard to an extent. And so I think that's a lot of it too, getting on the internet, and as the Gary V's and all these internet personalities in the business world are coming up, I think a lot of us just grew up with, hey, this is the only thing to do, because we see our parents get fired, we see our parents struggling, getting yelled at, not being treated properly, whatever. And it's like, just to end up being laid off when things get hard. Anyone who had a parent during the '08 crisis, anyone who's had even sometimes parents during the 2020 crisis, or where a lot of us have been in school during that time and weren't able to get jobs. So it's not even a question of, should I be going in this direction? That nowadays it's like, it's the only option is to go out and try to create your own job. So I think that's a big part of it too.
Oh, that's excellent. And that ties into an interview I watched just yesterday very interesting dynamic. You watch CNBC, I'm sure, a lot more than most people, probably Bloomberg as well. Honestly speaking, it'd be great to get a Bloomberg terminal in my office at some point, but
Oh, you're going big time.
I, I would think if anything, it'd probably be more up your alley because you'd probably be able to actually chart that pretty well. But I watched Donald Trump Jr., and he's polarizing as it is in some cases, but he was actually answering a question as to why they got into crypto. And I'm not going to put myself in a position to ever understand his lifestyle or how he's been brought up, but there is clearly a difference. Obviously, he's in the public sphere. He had the lucky draw of having his parents or his father as to be the president now. But he mentioned something about how they realized as a family that they were part of this. They were only at the top of a pyramid scheme or a pyramid structure that literally disadvantaged them regardless of their status, is what I gathered from it. Because once their father became political, and wow, this just turned really political really quickly, but once their father became political, they all of a sudden became unbanked, which most people don't understand what that concept even is. Essentially, if you're calling a bank to get support financially for any project or any kind of verification, you essentially hit a lot of hurdles to get what you want to get done, especially when prior to that, everything was smooth. So you're talking about the dynamic of not being able to, the everyday person may not be able to, they may see value in crypto because there are limitations in the regular traditional way of doing things with respect to getting a job, or some natural disaster happens and you're stuck. You can talk about Hawaii and, how people were only given a certain amount of dollars, which in my opinion doesn't equate to the losses that they incurred because of that natural disaster, and the list goes on. But he was mentioning, their only answer was crypto. And right now, it depends on your perspective. They're clearly in a position to get a lot of work done because their father is in a position of power. And now the name is a little bit more weighted. Obviously, we can assume that was the case prior to the presidency, but yeah, I guess that's literally what do they call this term? It's the great equalizer, or the level playing field is what we're in right now with respect to crypto. So we almost all get to start from the same level to some extent, obviously, depending on when you started or when you got involved or exposed to this entire industry. You say crypto, how long of an exposure do you think it's actually worth it to fully take advantage of that industry? Do you need to be in for a year and you could find that success, or should you have been in it for 10?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. If we look back to Bitcoin itself, I would say that anyone who was around 10 years ago is, and probably has their life completely changed at this point, even if you're putting a couple $100 into the space.
Yeah.
Now, the reality is that so far what we've seen is diminishing returns. So that type of explosive growth that we had over the past 10 years isn't necessarily what you're going to see over the next 10 years. With that being said, that you could look at it this way. You could say, okay, so to get that level of a life change, you might have to then double the timeline. Right now, that timeline needs to be 20 years because of the diminishing returns of the asset class. But assuming that the thesis here is that the system is moving in one direction, meaning that you have infinite money printing in the fiat system, and you have this space essentially where there's a limited amount of currency. You could call it Bitcoin, you could call it cryptocurrency, whatever. And now all of the ever inflating nature of all the fiat is only pouring into that area, assuming that there's even just a steady demand for the crypto, then the price of that will continue to rise. And the people who are invested in that side of the system, right, will continue to grow with that. Now, eventually, what's going to happen is we get to the point where we stop measuring our wealth in dollars, right? We start measuring our wealth in some other denominator, whether it's Bitcoin, whether it's, some people like to look at the future of XRP. I'm not overly hyped up about that, but at the end of the day, we got to look at the technology, look at the solutions that are being offered, and see why or how they may be in the position that they're in. And then, so yeah, I guess that's the thing, is like the time frame to be in it is for the rest of your life at the end of the day. And if you start to recognize that the system has already changed, I think I made a line that was like, what if the system already changed? What if the system already collapsed?
Even know?
And it's like, now it's time for people to start to catch up.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that's what I would say about that.
Yeah, it's a crazy thought experiment, honestly. And there's this saying that my mother always talks about. It's this: you don't necessarily see how you're going unless you are on the outside of the path. I'm trying to essentially translate it. The translation is, the literal term is, if you're on a path that curves, you won't actually be able to tell that it's curved, but someone on the outside of the path will be able to tell that it's curved. We can assume that the homeless man would be able to tell that that household over there has grown over the past few years, and maybe that family has transitioned to a new neighborhood. But because that homeless man is homeless, they can't actually see. They have a very clear picture of what kind of evolution that family has gone through. Whereas a family is probably going through the day-to-day thinking that everything is probably stagnant or too slow, or things aren't working out so well. So perspective is everything. So you make a great point about whether or not we'd be able to even tell if it's changed.
And I want to touch on that really quickly, because I think you're making an incredible point. This is why also that people who are not extremely wealthy are seeing what's happening, right? Because the people who are extremely wealthy, they're not looking, right? They're not looking around and seeing how things are changing. It's like they're inside of the system.
Exactly.
And it works for them. Whereas everyone else who's like in Venezuela or in Colombia, looking at the fact that their dollars don't work for them and that there are other options, right? Those are the people who are saying, oh, wait a minute, like this is going to change everything. It's the Eric Trumps, right? That are like, wait a minute, or Donald Trump, I don't even know which one it is.
Yeah.
Wait a minute, our dad is being debanked. We're from inside the system, but now we're getting pushed out of it. Yeah. So now it's an issue. So yeah,
perspective, everything. Yeah. What's your take on you said it's going to affect everything, and I agree with that. I was just watching Sergey, the co-founder of Chainlink's interview yesterday, and he was mentioning that crypto is the opening act, and I was like, man, this is the stuff I like to hear. Like, first and foremost, I think he had a meeting with the chairman of the SEC this week as well, and they were discussing everything tokenization. And I think they go through a lot of these kinds of in-person meetings to try and engage with the SEC, engages with the market or the industry quite often, quite frequently, to determine what kinds of direction they should take with regulation. And that's funny because just recently they mentioned that they're looking to make some changes to their actual approach for regulation. And I think that's good. Engagement with the industry is important. But to what extent are we talking about, in your opinion, when it comes down to, crypto affecting or changing everything? Like, what does that look like to you?
Yeah, and I didn't watch the interview yet, but Sergey Nazarov is by far one of the best people to listen to regarding what the future of all of this looks like. And the seat that he sits in, the solution that he's built out over the past almost decade, I believe at this point, is integral to what that future looks like. So he's not just talking about it, he's actually building this future. And at this point, when you look at Chainlink and their involvement with organizations like the Depository Trust and Clearing Corporation in the United States, the DTCC, the organization that is literally responsible for clearing all of the stocks and bonds transactions, securities transactions in the entire system. Quadrillions of dollars traded every year, and they're working directly with Chainlink to solve this problem of how do we potentially use blockchain solutions in the security space while also having access to data from external systems?
Yeah, that's a sleeper.
Oh man, like when you can take the current infrastructure, right? All of the financial infrastructure basically that exists today, all securities transactions, we'll start there, let's stay there. And we can take all of the data in the world and we can turn those into one big system. That right there opens the floodgates for unlimited types of financial use cases for data, is how I look at it, right? Like now we can start to value data as the oil that it is, data as the gold that we've been talking about it as over the past decade, 2 decades of the internet becoming a thing. Hopefully that paints a little bit of a picture. There's the concept of smart cities, right? Having autonomous decisions being made by IoT devices all over the world, right? All over your city, your locality.
You're touching on
it. We've got the humanoid robots. Okay, that's one thing, but then we've also just got all of the sensors and data that's already there, and that we can continue to build off of. And that goes into some of the scalability of that technology. And we've got 5G. So we have a lot of that. We have a lot of what you would need to be able to get this information from one place to another very quickly and to capture it in IoT devices and send it across the world. Now, and now adding in this concept of blockchain technology, we can start to apply financial use cases to that kind of data, like insurance companies, as an example. Okay, this stuff gets scary, and I'm just going to give an example that's a little bit scary, but at the end of the day, is towards a world that we're moving in. Like in China, for instance, people walking across the street, you're jaywalking. Like those cameras are going to pick that up. They're going to send you a ticket, and they're going to say, "Yo, dude, like you owe us." In a less authoritarian but still not great concept, an insurance company, like this dude, and I don't have to know his name, I can just have some random digital identifier of this person, loves to jaywalk and loves to do stupid stuff with his time or his life. And because of that, and when I say stupid stuff, whatever, just being reckless or putting his health on the line is the only point, right? So now as a health insurance company, I'm gonna have to charge this guy a little bit more because he's acting a little bit crazy. And the reality is companies already do this. Companies already do this with your car. All right, like they're already tracking your car data. And the only difference here will be that they'll be able to programmatically increase your rate based upon what you're doing. So
the touch points are completely taken off, or at least delegated to these intelligent technologies that we're engaging with knowingly and unknowingly. It's crazy. You mentioned the IoT, which is Internet of Things for those that are watching. At the genesis or the beginning of this whole project of FutureTrendToday, I tried putting together like a program, or not a program, I put together like a series called The Lingo. It sounded cool to me at that time. I was like, how do I make this seemingly boring information interesting to someone who is an onlooker into some form of culture type, something that pierces through the culture of modern contemporary pop culture? Like the lingo sounds clean. So I was like, Internet of Things is one thing that most people don't actually understand the concept of. And you do mention, like, example of China. Honestly speaking, some of this stuff, I don't even know whether I should be excited about it or not. I'm excited because I know that I understand it to some extent, but I'm like weary to some extent with respect to how it's going to be used. Then again, I have nothing to hide, so it's not a situation of me being fearful of, oh, if I've done something stupid myself. But at the end of the day, the technologies make life more efficient for the regulators. And technically speaking, if you are the consumer, it can also be used to make your life more efficient as well. But Internet of Things, my wife was asking me just like last month. So to what extent do I see these technologies that are now being talked about in such a favorable way? How do I see them actually evolving? Because 10 years ago, I was for the notion that Silk Road is a bad idea. Silk Road utilizes Bitcoin and its criminals, because that's what the intellectual mainstream media was purporting. Bitcoin's bad for the environment. Bitcoin's bad for energy. Bitcoin's what the criminals use. Traffickers use this stuff. XYZ. I don't want to get banned completely here, but they coupled all the negatives and associated those negatives with crypto. So from a very fundamental first principles perspective, I just had to explain to her, okay, so what needs to happen for, first and foremost, the assets that I keep telling her we should dump our savings into? What needs to happen for those to appreciate over time? And so she was quizzing me very authentically and reasonable questions, like what needs to happen. And I'm just saying, like, it has to do with the everyday use of something. You don't necessarily think about how water gets to your house. You don't think about how electricity gets to your house. You don't necessarily even think about how the gas gets to the gas station, but there's a bunch of processes that happen behind the scenes which the everyday consumer wouldn't necessarily pay attention to. So let's just talk about the evolution of internet. So I mentioned to her, think about your fridge. Like we went fridge shopping for a few months ago, and there were some really like interesting concepts for fridges. Screen on the front, it reads the temperature, tells you the quantity of whatever is in the fridge, like a completely AI enabled kind of device. And wow, in our heads, we were like, yeah, we'll just pause on that. We don't need that much. We don't need that much in our house. I'd much rather deal with a very simple deep freezer in the garage where all the essentials are and you dip in there. But if you think about it, IoT is, okay, so the actual concept that we were trying to discuss is how that actually ties into AI. IoT coupled with AI, coupled with IOV, which is the Internet of Value, is like an entire autonomous monster in my head. And if we were to think about, right now we're talking about agentic AI capabilities with these large language models. they're essentially they're able to think for themselves, able to analyze data and act accordingly, like pretty much hands-free. So a fridge doesn't have enough, I don't know, cheese in it or milk. You're running low on your milk. The fridge is going to be able to actually tell what quantity you have, what quantity of milk you have in that at a particular time, and it will essentially automatically purchase that milk for you. So think about, I don't know if where you are, you have an Instacart or even Uber Eats, like it engages a purchase for someone to essentially come and replenish that low quantity, or that diminishing, or that empty jug of milk, let's just say that. And that's without you having to even touch the milk. So all you will do is, oh, you're on your way to work, and the morning that you're leaving, everything would automatically, essentially, obviously they probably, depending on if you're going to work, if you're not, but it would either ping you on your phone automatically that your delivery is here for whatever that item is, and it's automated. This morning she talked about she loves the, anyways, I tried to explain that to her, and she understood, asked me some few other questions, and it worked out nicely. But the actual full, just touching on what Sergey actually talked about, the main event about crypto is being able to get, if we enable the AI side to things, if we enable AI or utilize AI accordingly with crypto and automate it, it essentially makes life almost like dealing with, I don't know if you watched Wall-E before, like everything is automated in Wall-E. That's a cartoon. I don't think people really, I think people need to watch that movie again and think maybe 50 years from now what life could be. They completely let go. Everything's automated. The stats regarding health are pretty terrible, but she went in depth on how that could be a challenge. We discussed that. She mentioned that she found Brad Garlinghouse's video on, what's this one? He mentioned, there's 3 videos that we went through, but he mentioned, it's escaping me, but I'll remember it. Long story short, you know what? I'm just going to actually go through my text messages because she did this. I'll skip this part eventually.
Yeah, no, sounds cool.
It's pretty specific. We're talking about the milk delivering and how. Hey, babe, which Brad Garlinghouse video were you referring to that you were excited about that we discussed yesterday? Wow, Siri's actually working for me this time. It did not even spell Brad. It said Brad Garlinghouse.
That's funny because there's like the meme of bread, garlic breath or something.
Was it the Link guys that were actually like going at him?
Yeah.
Litecoin.
I think
Litecoin.
so.
Yeah, it might have been Litecoin. Thank you. She hit me with the alpha here. So she mentioned, she was discussing that she loved the video of how Brad Garlinghouse he was talking about payday structures and how every 2 weeks, why is it that every 2 weeks we expect, or why is the system set up in a way that we only get paid every 2 weeks? Does everybody really know the reason why that's the case? And that has to do with clearinghouses is what I believe that is. Now, getting back to the actual point that I was trying to get at here is enabling Internet of Value, Internet of Things, and AI, we can get paid by the second.
Absolutely, dude.
We can get paid by the second, and instead of, obviously you have maybe your 100,000 that your salary is, but as opposed to waiting every 2 weeks to get your set amount of whatever after taxes, maybe 2,500, whatever, every 2 weeks, taxes and benefits and all that, you are getting paid by the second, and you see every incremental cent hit your account. At the same time, you have other things like your internet bill being taken out of your account by the second based on your usage. You have your fines, like you mentioned, the China example, being taken out of your account automatically. So you essentially just have to sit back and just watch life happen to you. It's crazy. That's why I called it a monster. And I don't know, there's a lot of, I don't know how that's going to be. I don't know how how the powers that be or the institutions that are in charge of this kind of evolution are going to roll that out. I think it's going to take a lot of education, but what can a person like ourselves do to prepare for that kind of an evolution? But what's your take on that?
Yeah. So the image there is like a lot of people reference the movie, I think it's called In Time with Justin Timberlake.
Got it.
And that's like the perfect kind of picture that you painted of basically like time is currency for them. And so their time is always going down throughout the movie unless they like basically make money, I think is how it works.
Oh, wow.
And so that's like what the system could end up looking like. At least that's like a cool visualization of what it could be, where it's you can watch your account. It's either going down at all times or it's staying flat or it's going up at all times. And it's, oh, wow, that's a crazy thought of how that future could look. But I don't think it's far-fetched. And to prepare for that, I think what's important is just stay super, super educated. We're clearly at an inflection point where I've seen a lot of people say, oh, you've had so much time to do this and that. And I don't completely disagree with that for some people, but it's just not the case for everyone. At the end of the day, like there's people who are kids who have just been kids this whole time. So it's, listen, we have to continue to do things to educate people, I think. And my part of my mission is to make sure that people are actually aware of what's happening, especially the young kids who didn't have a chance or who are just like in high school. These kids don't have money when it comes to trying to invest in these technologies. And so at the very minimum, we have to at least know that it's happening so that when the time comes, we understand that this is something to invest in. And that's why it's also important for me to just talk about investing in general. What is investing? Why do we invest?
Yeah.
And another part of this that I think is like understanding that there are different ways that this value transfer will take place. As an example, people who experimented with DeFi protocols early on and who continue to be early in DeFi, they might get an airdrop one day.
Yeah.
The Uniswap airdrop one day, like everyone just got like minimum $1,400 in the Uniswap token for just having interacted with the protocol.
Yeah.
And playing around with things, tinkering around, get in the trenches and just play around with stuff and see how it works. I think that alone could be massive. Who's to say that we don't have that same kind of a mechanism that happens from the government or from supranational organizations when there's some new currency unit issued?
Exactly.
Yeah, just play around with stuff, read white papers. I tell people read white papers. It's very easy to just skim over these websites. But I've noticed that nowadays, you really can't tell what's going on with these projects until you read the white paper and see what actually differentiates it, because they say whatever they want to say on the website. When you look into the actual mechanics of how these things work, it allows you to also be prepared for things like IoT. How does this stuff actually interact with IoT? How exactly does this actually interact with AI? And you start to learn that in crypto, when you really do the work, you have to become an economist and you have to become a technologist to some degree. You have to start to learn internet protocol. You have to start to learn about IoT and all these other things. And that's what I think is so beautiful about it too, is like when you start digging deep into blockchain and crypto, you have to learn about so many other things in the world.
Yeah, I remember watching one of your interviews mentioning about how the '08 inflection or situation happened and it forced you to, I think I'm capturing this right, it forced you to have to really study this stuff. And that's after you also stumbled on crypto. So that crypto merging with life experiences and all that really pushed you to have to master this topic. And I agree with you 100%. I think there's a first mover advantage in everything that is crypto, AI, or technology in general, which, going back to our first, I think, 5 minutes of this conversation, there's a diminishing return if you wait longer, or you stay out of the the game longer than you need to. The individuals that actually find it intimidating, those that find it intimidating to actually engage in this kind of information or explore this kind of information are doing themselves a disservice, is what I take it as. I think you're better off knowing what AI is capable of than ignoring it completely. You're talking about white papers. I'm taking notes as we're chatting, by the way. I have a few things to do. I have a movie to watch. I have some more information to dig up on. And you mentioned white papers. How do we actually, have you found a certain way of filtering through what a white paper is actually purporting? We have AI now, so you can essentially clone anybody's white paper. Let's be honest, people do this you can forge anything with AI because there aren't any, yes, they came up with legislation regarding how it's used, but it's free for all. So being able to determine whether something's legitimate or not is completely different. So if you're going back circa before 2020 to what things are like right now. So if you're comparing today's white paper exploration or exercise of filtering, how would you actually go about that process to make sure that you're reading the right information?
You make an incredible point. And you're right. Things have changed since I made that deep dive, which was in 2020, was the year where I sat down and I said, I'm going to go through the top 100 projects and read all of their white papers. And this is another thing, right? Is now we have to come to the fact that a lot of this code is open source. So the only other way that you could, or a way that you could use AI to your advantage in this is to take a white paper, right? Take the base code, the code base of this network or whatever it is you're looking at, and ask ChatGPT, is this what this is delivering? Is this code base what this white paper is saying it is? Or what holes, right, are there in the two different things? Because you also have to ask, it to give you the negatives is another thing that people keep talking about and preaching about prompt engineering and so on. But you just made me think about that on the spot. I think that would be a good way to go about it. You have to go one layer deeper. And that's the beauty of crypto and blockchain, though, is that it's an open source protocol. And if it's not, then it's not. And that's another thing to keep in mind as well.
Oh man, have you been? I'm not sure if you're on. Are you on X at all or no?
I'm on there.
Have you been seeing any of that news about how the Bitcoin address is starting with 1 versus those that don't?
I have
come
not.
across that?
No, what's that about?
Dude, the authenticity of Bitcoin is now in question again. Again, I don't know how excited I should be about this stuff. I get excited and I'm like, Apparently the original protocol actually had 1 as the address. Every address, Bitcoin address to begin with, started with 1. And you have institutions that are pushing a particular version. If you look into it and you don't see a 1, you should have some question marks about that as to whether that is in fact Bitcoin or not. Now,
wow,
I just transitioned completely into Bitcoin talk, but at the end of the day, there was a conversation about whether or not Bitcoin's Satoshi vision was actually the real Bitcoin. There's a whole conversation about Greg Wright. There's an individual that was purporting to be Satoshi himself. I'm like, that's real nice, dude. In my opinion, I'm like, yeah, that's too easy. If that was the case, we would all know. First and foremost, Bitcoin would have crashed a long time ago, in my opinion, if that was the reality.
Right.
And more recently, as of the past 24 to 48 hours, there's a conversation of Russia essentially discussing America's ambition with cryptocurrency, in that they're planning on wiping out the entire debt, 37 trillion, which isn't, understanding where crypto is now, that is not a lot of money compared to what is actually in the scheme of things. I'm saying that, yeah, look at me, like 37 trillion. Like I'm sitting here like I have something to talk about, but in the grand scheme of where this entire market is going, Trump himself said that he's going to use a little crypto check to wipe out the debt. He said that in an interview twice now. Like he said it quietly, and then I think he said it directly the second time. And those that don't pay attention, who are just stuck on the fact that they hate Trump or they don't necessarily like his politics or whatever, you have to listen to the quiet parts. There is a plan bigger than what I'm exposed to, honestly, or clearly, but I can only assume that there's some attempt to try and use the everyday transaction to the whole concept of tokenization, the whole concept of real world assets being tokenized, stocks. That's a conversation that's become louder in the past, I'd say 30 days. Like 30 days. When was the Genius Act passed? We're talking about stable coins and all that. I guess we can transition into now your take on what the money supply, coupled with these, obviously the news of NASDAQ investing in Gemini, after some people are saying after the XRP MasterCard was launched with Gemini, they decided to flex their muscles.
Yeah, dude, things are heating up. So not only that, but they also just filed to tokenize securities with the SEC. So that pretty much was like same day, if not
literally
apart. So
literally, the next day after.
Yeah, you're definitely on the money with that.
Crazy? No, like, sorry to interrupt you. That's crazy. In my opinion, just this point back 2 years ago, we're in 2025, 2 years ago, if not last year. Sorry, it was actually last March. Someone quote me, or at least put in the comments wherever. Wasn't it Jamie Dimon that was talking about how this stuff was still something they weren't looking into? Like he was still bad mouthing crypto or Bitcoin or something of the sort. But now everybody is now rushing like a gold rush to get this stuff.
Yep.
And just in the last 30 days, we're here talking about tokenizing stocks.
Crazy.
So I told you what.
Yeah, a lot of stuff to tap into there. The big thing is definitely the Russia calling out the United States on this, and you pointing out that Donald Trump said himself, he said it himself. The idea is to write a little crypto check and wipe out the debt. He said this. When I saw people bringing that up, I was like, wait a minute, because I remember this happening. He said this twice. There was 2 separate occasions where he has said that, where there was one where he was on a podium at some crypto conference and he said that. And then he said it on Fox News or whatever that interview was, where he said it again. And so it's okay. So this isn't him just saying some stuff, because he does do that a lot. He says a lot of stuff. But when he starts to repeat himself, it's, oh, I might need to pay attention to what he's saying there. And obviously, it's not even just what he said at this point, right? It's the actions of the administration have clearly been toward some sort of adoption of this cryptocurrency technology and regime. And now we have Congress in the United States also this week launching their own bill to actually try and put this into law, that we have the strategic Bitcoin reserve, and asking for the Treasury to launch the report. This is another thing that came up with someone in a private conversation. The US has still not released its report of how much Bitcoin it has.
Thank you.
What's going on with that?
They also haven't checked out. They haven't checked out Fort Knox either, by the way.
Still haven't actually checked out Fort Knox. So there is something happening here for sure at this point. And then when you just add in the fact that this is separate, but when you add in the fact that the BLS, the Bureau of Labor Statistics in the United States, is failing to properly report numbers, we're getting revisions, the biggest revisions we've ever seen. Clearly, the labor market was way worse than anyone thought. And I'm only bringing this up as a fact of, there's information that's just not being shared. Like, you can't make that mistake twice in 1 year. You know what I'm saying? Come on.
Since when do official institutions flop on numbers like that? The last time I saw that being a crazy issue was when Moody's didn't do a good job in 08. Like Moody's, I think it was Moody's. All these rating agencies were essentially propping. They were positioning these financial institutions as AAA, whatever the heck it was. Like, they did that then, and everybody was like, this is crazy. Heck, they took the time to actually put a movie out, and The Big Short was a thing. We watched The Big Short, and that was actually an item that was emphasized as, this should not happen. The faith that we have in institutions has eroded over the past, I'd say, probably 2 decades minimum. And it doesn't help that we have institutions like what you just mentioned. They're reporting numbers that aren't necessarily accurate. And I think it's within the moment, it's in the moment, and they're trusting that because information is essentially being thrown at the everyday person rapid fire every day. They're not going to slow down to pay attention to all this stuff. It's almost, we can say it now and we'll correct it later. But that correction later does not actually reflect in the way that it could reflect very negatively for the everyday person, if we're thinking about it, because that could be someone's job, like, gone just because of a mistake that they would correct later. I don't know, man. You kind of have to slow things down in your head to fully process everything that's going on.
Yeah, it's a lot. And I remember things being like this in 2020 a little bit as well, where it just felt like every day or so there was some crazy announcement about what's happening with crypto, and even on the global stage with like BRICS and stuff like that. And we're back at that stage right now. Yep. And it does line up with where it seems like we're at in the market cycle as well, where this could continue to heat up for the next 90, 120 days. And eventually we hit this peak, this climax of, this has been my thesis. I'm going to continue to spread the word that I believe that we're going to get the Clarity Act passed. We're going to have the United States at this point actually saying, oh, we're going to wipe out our debt with crypto. We're going to have this huge run up in the price and the value of all these cryptos. And then that's going to mark the top, is right when all this legislation and stuff is coming in.
Yeah.
So now,
when you say market top, sorry, Keith, when you say market top, you're talking about a correction back down?
A big correction in going back through the normal 4-year cycles. Now, let's say that's one scenario. All right, we get the big run up, it blow off top, huge runs up in prices, Bitcoin hits 180,000, whatever. I have no idea where the price of Bitcoin is going, for the record. And then all of a sudden, that is the top, right? Whenever the most euphoric moment in the market is when there's going to be a top. Now, that's one scenario. The other scenario, which everyone wants to keep talking about, a lot of people who have been around for this whole thing, I don't know how long they've been around is my point, actually. I think that they probably haven't. And they're saying that this is going to be different and that there is a super cycle that is occurring. Now, I'm not going to write off that. And in fact, I always position myself for that to always be the case, because my thesis is that at some point we will have a super cycle where you have this huge run up, and that is just so powerful that you might not get a retracement down to levels that we ever saw in the past.
You'd be priced out.
Yeah. So I'm not writing that off, but I'm just saying you have to be prepared for both scenarios.
Realistic.
And in the scenario that we have this big blow off top and then we go through another 4-year cycle, I also just believe technologically, based on where we're at, like, it just feels like we probably need another 4 to 5 years to really fully do this. I could be wrong.
We're not ready yet. I don't think so.
Yeah, it just doesn't feel like it.
Doesn't feel like they got too much going on at the same time.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's your cat? Sorry, go ahead.
One other thing on that, because I think it's interesting to think about this brain exercise. I had a friend who was like, dude, but no one knows about this stuff. And he was using that to justify, oh, this is why. Actually, I was using this to justify why it's not time yet. I was like, oh, like people don't really know. But then he was like, dude, like honestly, like people will never really like dig deep into this stuff. And at this point, like it actually might make more sense that when people aren't ready for it is when it's going to happen. The thing that you're least expecting is when it might go down. So that's the other side of that I just wanted to put out, is just some scenarios to think about.
Yeah, crazy scenarios. And talking about scenarios in general, like the catalyst, in my opinion, could be a negative as well. So technically speaking, a lot of people didn't ever really think about the disadvantages of being strip searched or searched in general going while they're traveling. That just happened overnight because of a certain scenario or a negative situation that happened.
Real.
People never actually thought about the repercussions of being able to stand 6 feet to the, if you break a 6-foot bubble of the next person, you could infect them. These are all negatives that essentially push certain mandates or changes in our everyday social experience. So will we ever know? No, I don't think we will. So most people aren't even paying attention to the fact that domestically you can send a transaction to a different account and it will clear within a few minutes. I have a conversation. Let's take that offline. I have something to show you about that. But that's that we're running 2015 with some local banks here in Canada. And let's just say that they used Ripple for that. And it was a conversation between the States, Canada, and Germany. So it was a partnership between Ripple, Deutsche Bank, and one local bank where I'm at. I don't want to dox myself completely, but no one was paying attention to that but a few people. I even brought it up with one of my managers when I was working in the office, and he was like, yeah, dude, I saw that video. I clued him into that video, and he ended up investing in Ripple or Ethereum at the time. It was crazy, but he called me a few years later saying, yo, dude, if I didn't have a conversation with you, I would be broke. He's doing well for himself. I think he retired. Something interesting like that. But yeah,
that's wild.
People don't pay attention to this stuff, man. And it's not I guess the good thing is it isn't as loud because it's just woven into the everyday person's life. Like it's not, I don't know how to think about it, but the opportunity's there. Is it that revolutionary? I guess people use internet like it's normal right now. My kid will never actually understand what dial-up is, but he knows what Chat GPT is, and he's young as young. Like he knows what that is. And it's interesting, but I was going to mention something about you're very thorough with your economic terms and macroeconomic concepts. How have you unpacked that catalyst of the M2 money supply and how that works with our current state? Because I think October is a month that, if hypothetically speaking, if rates aren't cut in the month of September, if the Federal Reserve doesn't cut interest rates in the month of September, then it's not going to look very good for America in October, is what I'm understanding. Have you looked at how that dynamic could actually shape? Because right now they've loaded the market. I think it's almost pretty much priced in to some extent that rates are going to get cut. People are assuming that it's going to catalyze, obviously, because Q4 is typical of that. But what's your take on how that might unfold?
Yes. So here's the thing so in my community, we have some conversations about stuff like this. Every 2 weeks, we're coming together to talk about what we're seeing in the markets. Sure. And what we talked about last night was how we got these jobs market revisions. And something that came to my mind when I saw that and saw that the market didn't really react to the fact that we had the largest revision in the jobs report in history. And the market just didn't care. So to me, what that meant was that was in March that we had the jobs down 1 million. So now we're probably fine. The worst has already happened and they just didn't tell us about it.
Yeah.
So with that being said, that this potential lowering of the rates in the September meeting here and also going into October, markets are pricing in the idea that we're going to have at least 50 basis points, which is even 75 basis points by the end of the year. And like that's just going to mean an easing of conditions. Now, in the past, what we've seen though is that markets don't necessarily react very well to rates being cut, because what it means is that we're going into, right? Like that means that something's wrong, essentially.
Yeah.
Like, why do we need to lower rates? Because the economy slowed down, because people have lost their jobs, and so on. I think right now it's really tricky. Tomorrow we get CPI in the United States, and I think that might help paint a little bit more of a picture of like where this dual mandate is at. But I definitely don't envy Jerome Powell, and I don't envy anyone else who's around him, because they are all dealing with a lot of issues at the moment.
A lot of issues, man. A lot of issues. Interviews in the middle of a construction site, being called out by the president live on television. That's the issue right there.
He didn't sign up for that.
He was blindsided like crazy. Yeah, an indicator with respect to what you're mentioning as well is the price of gold's definitely done some. There's some price action that's actually been reflected in gold's price in the past. I'd say probably a week or so, that indicates negative market conditions. Let's just say that. Sure.
Yeah.
Economically, if we're talking about the FOMC is actually due for the 17th, I'm assuming, right? That's when the next meeting is. Is that next week?
Yep. Next week, next Wednesday, or 1 week from today.
Yeah. So that might therefore mean we might see some run up before the end of this week into next week, which would have therefore reflected that whatever would potentially happen on the 17th would have been priced in. So essentially, if the rates do actually get cut, there may be a little bit of a, at least in my analysis, whenever this kind of stuff happens, there may be a little bit of a bump, but by the time the actual news comes out, it's already been priced in to some extent. So it's almost like a blow off the top, and whoever decides to jump in just when the news is released is essentially exit liquidity.
Right.
But then again, that's just the month of September. Q4 hasn't actually officially started until the line of October is crossed. So if we're talking the rest of the year, not financial advice, and I may be completely off my mark here, you might want to keep an optimistic, probably perspective for the rest of what their year could actually unfold. So I don't see that. You mentioned, man, there's so many topics I want to touch on here, because in my head, I'm trying to be like, do I go weird on these people and let them know what I'm into a lot? Because I'm into riddles like hard. Like I try to analyze a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
It's a lot of weird stuff, but I find it interesting personally. It's entertaining. So, being able to think backwards and twist my mind 5 different ways. They're talking about this concept of price before law. We're getting this whole rate cut situation happening potentially this month of September, and law potentially being passed in October sometime, likely signed end of October, November, give or take. By law, I'm talking about the Clarity Act or the Market Structures Act. Is that something that the average individual should focus on at all, or prepare for in any capacity? Or is it a situation of just wait and see? That's the notion I'm on a wait and see for about a decade at least. Like I have to at least wait for a few decades to realize what I want to realize out of crypto. But what's your take for the next 2 months at least with respect to the rate cuts and the passing of the Clarity Act?
Yeah, I'm at a place where I have no idea. I'm just gonna be honest. If we look at just like the market cycle in crypto itself and try to keep an eye on M2 and whatnot, like we should have a few more months of up just based on history. Now, right. It doesn't necessarily have to work that way. So I think I really have no idea. And I try to stay as tactical. So for anyone who doesn't watch me closely, I look at my portfolio on 3 different levels. I have my long-term secular part of my portfolio. I have my mid-range game, okay, which is more of my tactical positioning for the most part. And then I have my very short-term kind of trades that I do. And so the way that I look at it is like anything that's in my long-term, like secular view, I don't really care what happens over the next 2-3 months, even 2-3 years. Crypto is going to go up in the next decade. Same thing for my technology stocks, my NASDAQ. It's going to go up. I don't really care. Now, the mid-range game is where you can get a little bit more tactical and look at, okay, what's happening with the actual market cycles. And in what's happening there, I keep that as a very small portion of my portfolio. They're long-term or short-term. And this is me just like talking about how I look at things, because the tactical midterm 6 months to 18 months is like really hard to get right. Even if you're like at Morgan Stanley getting all the data, all the research, they don't always necessarily make a ton of money. A lot of funds don't outperform the market. Most funds don't outperform the market. So when it comes to that shorter term is actually when you can actually develop some edge over the market. And now you don't want to start competing with Jane Street, right, on the microseconds and trying to like be a market maker. But within the hours of the day, there are actually some really interesting opportunities to take advantage of what are called like levels of liquidity. And so that's the game that I play when it comes to that. So my only point is I have no idea what's going to happen in the next 3 months. And because of that, I stay neutral in that middle part of my portfolio and I play the short-term game with that.
Great policy. That is a great policy because at the end of the day, you're not also manipulated by the ebbs and flows of this entire machine that we're essentially trying to tame. And you mentioned Jane Street, like we're talking about institutions at the end of the day that have algorithms doing all these trades for them anyway. They're market makers. You just look at the daily buys. I don't know if you pay attention to the logs on BlackRock's purchasing of Bitcoin and Ethereum. Like daily, we're talking about maybe $50 to $100 million swings with respect to purchases. Like
Wow.
every single day you'll see, I don't know, 2,000 Ethereum got purchased at this point, or 10,000 X got. It's very hard, very large volume purchases. What these institutions engage in very large purchases on a daily basis, and no one pays attention to them when they're buying because they'll have a buying streak of 20 days, and then everyone pays attention to their sells. Like you're also dealing with a situation where they're front running the entire industry, and then because people try to copy trade or whatever, they all end up leveraging 50x and then the market changes direction and everyone's liquidated, like literally overnight. So for the short-term side, if you're talking about day trading, I'm personally a swing trader. If I'm to think about it, I'd say 95% I hold everything, but I swing trade some, and that's just my philosophy. I don't necessarily want to go full head first on this stuff, but the fundamentals already show that this is growing over time. So I want to be positioned, and I don't want the situation of, I tell my kids like one day, hey, I sold 10,000 Bitcoin I bought pizza with 10,000 Bitcoin back in the day. And now that would be life-changing generationally. And I don't necessarily think we've even touched the actual move yet because it's not an everyday conversation. But then again, is it really a price conversation that we should be looking for? I don't necessarily think that should be the only focus here, because the price of something is what someone's willing to pay for it anyway. So there's a greater fool's theory or concept you can think about here where, hey, if you get your neighbor to buy your shovel for $100, which you only paid $20 for because they need it right now, you just made $80. So it really depends on who is willing to take advantage of it. But I think there's an also underlying question as to what this technology really is, because everyone's focused on price action only, but the technology itself is, I think, it has more to do with legitimacy and the ability to actually track the origin of a particular transaction, or the sender versus the receiver of a particular fund or product or item, or actually maybe measure of value, as opposed to, oh, I get to hold this thing and make money. Because technically speaking, you can say that gold can be used for, it has many functions. Silver has many functions. You can do a lot with these precious metals. But what can you really do with the technology we're talking about? We're talking about data, we're talking about value, and authenticity, authentication, like all of that. God forbid we start talking about votes being put on the blockchain. It would be a different story altogether. I don't think people are ready for that conversation. And I think that's part of the reason why these technologies have been slow, because the actual auditing processes for these day-to-day activities that we engage in on a regular basis, they could be used against certain individuals that we have maybe assumed were above the law. I don't know. You take that for what it's worth. But yeah, I tend to pinball with this kind of stuff, because that's, if you're stuck into you've gone through a few rabbit holes yourself. Like I've done the same for a few years, and it's tough to come out of it. And I'm always essentially judging what I experience on a regular basis in life against what I've learned in the dungeon of my office, trying to like do some research, because not everything is as it actually seems. It's, what do they say? The truth is much stranger than fiction, or whatever it is. But those are all cliches terms. It seems more impactful to stay grounded and try to live life on a more predictable or simple wavelength, is what I've figured out. It's easier on my stress. But you mentioned something very interesting to me regarding your journey, and you said you have a community. Yesterday you had a meeting with them. If you don't mind expanding, because technically speaking, I think a person like myself would be safe in that environment to share
Exactly.
to share my perspectives, or at least to share what I stumble upon on a daily basis. What does that look like, and how can the viewer, the watcher, take advantage of that?
Yeah, so there's two things too that I want to touch on, because one of the things is, like you mentioned, not just looking at the price of crypto, and that's a really important thing. And a big part of what I've got in my community and that we're doing is we're teaching people also how to use their cryptocurrency to generate flows of income. We do this through what's called decentralized finance. A lot of people have heard of it, and if not, it's essentially an alternative to using traditional finance. The term encompasses pretty much anything that is crypto, but when you say decentralized finance, you're also talking about actual protocols and mechanisms that you can use to, for instance, lend out your Ethereum or stake your Ethereum and start to earn a return on your assets in the native asset. And so the power of that is that with a stock, you can't really lend your stock out and get fractions of that stock back in return. You might be able to get, let's say, dollar amounts back, but in crypto, you can actually get the actual crypto as a return. And because of that, there's a much more powerful lever that you're pulling as far as growing your wealth over the long term, even if you're taking super low risk in these areas. And that's what I teach people to do. We don't go out and do crazy yield farming and stuff like that. We're just looking at the fact that, oh, you're looking to hold crypto long term. So instead of just having it sit there, why not also earn an income and cash flow off of that crypto? So that's a big part of what we're doing, is we're walking people through that process step by step, and also giving them a little bit more of the fundamentals if it's necessary to look at what is crypto, how does it actually work, and then how to start to think about building your actual plan around crypto. How do you make sure that you don't lose your crypto, things of that nature. It's a full-on mastermind where we have people that are very high level that are coming into this and that are just like looking to deploy large amounts of capital, but want to make sure they're doing it the right way. Then the other side of it is people who are like super brand new and are like, oh, I need a lot of help on figuring out how to do this the right way. And so we're giving people that support in there. We're meeting weekly. And then on top of that, we also have basically these people are getting access to the other community that I built out in the past, where we have these bi-weekly calls talking about what's happening in the markets. And then we have a call specifically around how we're looking at using technology in our lives. A lot of people that are in that group are business owners, and they're looking at, oh, how are we using technology and AI in our business and so on. Yeah, so for anyone who's interested in that, you can basically just check out any of my profiles and there'll be a link to it.
I'll put something in the bottom of this one as well here. I think that's invaluable. I need to find the time to make sure that I'm making the most of this kind of an engagement, because as we all know, information is being thrown at us at a rate we can't necessarily control all the time. So to have a community that, I'm assuming what I gathered from what you just mentioned is you essentially condense all that, but also make it palatable. Like you make it digestible for the everyday person who is either starting out or wanting to at least get a feeler for how to properly participate. Like you mentioned Ethereum in that, and I know that Ethereum is the actual ecosystem that's been built out the most with respect to decentralized finance now. You have the Tom Lees of the world reporting on CNBC that that's what everybody's going with now, and Ethereum is the one to go with. And I have a different perspective, which is the origin of that entire conversation and how it was given the opportunity to grow while others were put on the sideline intentionally. Because man, Ethereum's expensive to transact in. I know for a fact I was paying upwards of $500 a transaction when I first started in crypto for what I would consider probably very light transfers. It wasn't crazy, but because of gas fees and the timing of the day and so on, it was expensive. Have you explored any other protocols that actually enable DeFi or at least leverage it?
Yeah, so obviously the first thing about that is looking at layer twos and scalability solutions on Ethereum itself. That's one alternative to that. Usually you're going to find higher yields there anyway. Yeah. And then there's different ecosystems. You have Avalanche, you have Cosmos, things like that. I typically don't play around with too many things outside of Ethereum. I tend to stay on L2s, L3s in Ethereum. And then there's some native capabilities that have been done on the XRP ledger. And so I play around with some of that as well, some liquidity pools on the XRP ledger. And so those are the two main ecosystems that I personally play around with. But yeah, it is important to use L2s and L3s. Ethereum made the switch to proof of stake. I think it was in like 2020, 2021 or whatever. Right. And that helped a lot with having like crazy gas fees, but it's still not economically viable.
Yeah. So it depends on your scale of transaction, if you're dealing with a lot versus little, and exactly. Your frequency as well. So I agree with you. I've been doing a lot of research on the XRP ledger as well with respect to I think it's XLS 30. I'm trying to get familiarized with these concepts and how to participate effectively, so I'm not losing the assets themselves. And then just 2 days ago, or was it yesterday, Ledger comes out saying it's good that actually they came out with the warning that someone had compromised JavaScript for cold wallet. Sorry, not cold. Yeah, cold wallets, hardware wallet. So they pretty much warned everybody to stay off from avoid transacting on chain. So you have instances like that where having a community is invaluable, where you have an individual that could flag you. Everybody's going about their everyday life, so you may not necessarily pay attention to things. And if you have a friend or a community member that says, hey guys, this is what I came across, I'm gathering that's what your community would probably lend to, a lot of that kind of support indirectly.
Absolutely. There's so many scams, right? There's so many like places where you could just click a button and that end up being the end of your entire crypto journey. And it's unfortunate, but it's real. And so you definitely want to make sure that if you're going to, be in the space, that you surround yourself with people who have been through some of these things and that know what it's like to avoid these types of things. But like for instance, in the example that you gave, yeah, like your hardware wallet needs to be air gapped. Like you need to completely keep that away from everything. That should never be touching online things. That's the whole point of it, is an offline wallet. But some people don't know that, and they do use their hardware wallets for software use, and it's just not the right way to go about it. And then on top of that, just thinking about diversification in general. So this is my huge thing for me. It's like even Ledger had a moment where it wasn't that the device was compromised, but it's that their databases were compromised. And so the addresses and the names of those people were now exposed. So if someone wanted to come to your house because they maybe connected the fact that you have a ledger to the fact that you're wealthy, then oh no. So when you're ordering your ledger, order it to somewhere else. Order it to a PO box or something of that nature.
Smart.
So
man.
Just little things like that, and making sure that you spread your assets across different types of custody methods. There was a time in the US where it was like they were trying to stop people from using hardware wallets or for any non-custodial wallet. So there was a risk at some point that was going to be the case, that you weren't going to be able to self-custody your crypto.
Imagine a life where you can't do that. You're taking that option to self-custody is taken away from you. Man. It's almost like the gold confiscation of back in the day when they outlawed gold.
Yep.
That was a time, people. Like the everyday person was outlawed from keeping gold in their possession. And those that decided to be rebellious are probably laughing right now, but
yeah. And in the United States, that decision was upheld by the Supreme Court. Let's be clear. So it wasn't like that is the precedent that could happen again with any private property, essentially.
And it'd be easier to do that with crypto now because it's digital.
Oh yeah.
Easier. It's so easy.
Oh yeah. What people underestimate is the idea of the banking system is very highly regulated. So like the Office of Foreign Assets Control or whatever, like they can order to seize your bank account assets without any reason.
Any warning.
Any warning rather. So it's even in the banking system, you're not as safe as you think you are, but also when it comes to this crypto thing, like how are you going to use the crypto? Everyone wants to ignore the fact that you got to make sure that you can actually use the crypto in the real world. So no, you're not just like anonymous, flow free, nobody can touch it.
Yeah.
To an extent, like you have to be aware of those things and these laws and whether or not they're going to be passed. In the US, it looks like we've got favorability now, and that's a good thing. We've got a clear path forward, but you just have to continue to always diversify and keep these things in mind.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect point to actually pause on for the time being. We have so much to unpack, but let's pause and give some meat for the next conversation we have. Hopefully we can bring you on again.
Yes.
Yeah, Keith, I appreciate your time here, man. I know for a fact that you're a busy guy, so for what it's worth, I know that anyone who's watching this would be in a good position to keep engaging with your content. And I'll actually link your channel in the actual description. And you mentioned your community as well. I'll be more active in the next few weeks myself. So hopefully I'm not too late to the party. But I just want to say at the end of I love the way you're able to make very difficult concepts seem more, I don't know, more easy to like absorb. You mentioned it yourself at the beginning. You find it sometimes interesting, or at least you're taken back by your own ability to articulate things. And I think that's something that you've mastered from my perspective. I'm still trying to figure that out myself, but I personally love being in the background. I like this forum, or I use this forum as an opportunity for myself I use it as an opportunity to engage with people that are experts in certain fields. In my opinion, I think you're an expert at articulating these concepts that most people try to shy away from, or at least they aren't the most attractive topics, but the results is what we're actually after here. Long-term results, that could be the difference between retiring at 30 versus retiring at 70. And sometimes some people even can't retire. So there's an entire dynamic here that people have to pay attention to. And I would highly recommend following Keith on all his platforms. First and foremost, your YouTube is insane, dude. I hope to sit you down and literally take on as much information as I can from you regarding how you positioned yourself for that. But it's only the beginning. You've been in the game for just a month now, or is it a month and a half?
It's almost 3 months now. It started at the end of July.
Okay.
End of July.
Well,
yeah.
Time flies, and I clearly am not paying attention. I have my head in too many rabbit holes. But yeah, I look forward to what our next conversation will look like. And if anything, I would say now is probably a good time to say, just give me a second. There's one last question that I wanted to ask here, and I bookmarked it yesterday. I finally got into my Twitter account before I let you go. Okay. In your opinion, it's probably not important now, but do you think that there's a risk? The ecosystem that you're clearly active in when it comes to decentralized finance is Ethereum right now. I had a conversation a few years ago, we had a conversation earlier with Mark Phillips regarding Ethereum and how they were given an upper hand with respect to not being sued by the SEC for what I would assume was an ICO. Do you think that there's a risk that we could see a different change in, oh my goodness, I may be opening a Pandora's box here, but with the Clarity Act coming along here, are there risks to the current actual use cases and structures that Ethereum has been benefiting from for the past few years? Is that existential, or is that something that, again, we should probably just wait and see? I may be ruining someone's dinner right now, but
no, I think we have to ask these questions. We have to think about these things. I haven't fully read through anything that's in the Clarity Act. I did see, I think it was today or yesterday, Mr. Atkins at the SEC, Paul Atkins, said something about creating this super platform or something like that, where people would be able to lend, borrow, and like stake or whatever in one place, having a regulatory framework for that to work. Now, I imagine that's probably more for a centralized situation, but if you can have it in a centralized situation, then I don't see why that wouldn't also parse over to a decentralized situation. What I think is going to be interesting to see here is how the SEC and Congress come together to tag team, and the CFTC as well, to tag team on creating this Clarity Act and making sure that it actually does what they're hoping for it to do. Because without those agencies cooperating, it wouldn't. Come on, Congress has no idea. It's cool that we have that, because we never had that before. We never had the SEC and the CFTC actually working together, right, to make this stuff work. It's been a fight. They've been fighting each other the whole time. So
it's always been siloed, for sure.
Yeah,
that's crazy. Great stuff. Keith, you're a wealth of knowledge, man. Thanks for your time. We'll definitely love to have you on, and hopefully we'll make it more concise with some hot topics that are bound to be on the table the next time we chat.
Yeah.
Thanks again, man. If there's any questions, is there any last final thoughts you want to leave us with at all, or no?
No, of course, man. I think it'll be fun to follow up, because you've brought up some really important topics, and I'm sure we'll see some things change by the next time we speak.
Yeah, all the way, for sure. All right, another future focused person here. Thanks for the chat, Keith. We'll chat again soon.
Yes, sir. I appreciate it, man.